The Intergalactic Military Academy was a grand place, located on a planet that seemed to shimmer with energy. It was known across the galaxy for producing the best warriors, cadets who would go on to serve in powerful fleets and defend entire star systems. Students from all races and species came here, all with their own skills, strengths, and ways of training. But there was one cadet who was different, a human girl named Jane. From the moment Jane walked into the academy, she could feel the eyes on her. She was the only human in a class filled with alien cadets, each one larger, faster, and stronger than any human she had ever known. The aliens looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. They couldn't believe that someone so small and fragile was even allowed to join their prestigious program. "She's never going to make it," whispered one cadet, an alien with long, sharp fangs and glowing green skin. "Humans are weak. She'll be lucky to last a week." Another cadet, a tall, muscular being with 3 arms, laughed loudly. "Maybe they should send her to the medical bay for the first test. I doubt she'll last 5 minutes in the combat simulations." Despite their cruel jokes, Jane remained calm. She didn't flinch or show any sign that their words had an impact on her. Instead, she stood tall and focused on the task ahead. She had trained her whole life for this. No matter how different her body was from theirs, she had something they didn't: human determination. The first day of training was a tough one. The cadets were put through a series of physical challenges, strength tests, speed drills, and combat simulations that seemed impossible. The aliens performed with ease, their bodies built for battle, their natural instincts honed by years of war. But Jane, she was struggling. Her muscles weren't as strong, her reflexes weren't as fast, and the alien cadets made sure to point it out at every turn. "Come on, human. You call that a punch?" One cadet taunted as Jane tried to block an attack in the sparring session. She didn't respond. She just tried harder, pushing her limits, focusing on the techniques her trainers had taught her. She wasn't strong like the aliens, but she could be smart. She could be fast, and she could think ahead. At the end of the day, Jane sat alone in the corner of the gym, wiping the sweat from her brow. Her body ached, but her spirit was unbroken. She knew that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would be another challenge, and she would face it the same way, quietly, with determination and resilience. As the cadets laughed and joked around her, Jane set her sights on the future. They didn't know her yet, but soon they would. The next morning, Jane stood at the entrance of the training hall, her heart beating faster than usual. Today was the day. The day she would face the first official test of her training, a combat simulation. This would determine if she could keep up with the other cadets, or if she would be sent home in shame. Jane had trained for years for this moment, but today she was nervous. Inside the simulation room, the atmosphere was tense. Alien cadets lined up, their bodies towering over her, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. They still didn't believe she could do it. A few of them whispered among themselves, making jokes about how easy it would be to beat the human cadet. "Let's see how she handles this," Krell, one of the top cadets, muttered with a smirk. He was known for his strength and skill, and he looked at Jane with nothing but amusement. The simulation began with a loud beep. The room suddenly transformed, and Jane found herself standing in the middle of a war-torn city. Buildings were burning, smoke filled the air, and the sounds of explosions echoed in the distance. It was a chaotic and dangerous environment, meant to test not just strength but strategy, survival skills, and quick thinking. Jane quickly assessed her surroundings. She didn't have the brute strength of the aliens, but she was quick, and she could think on her feet. She ran to the nearest building for cover, her eyes scanning for any signs of danger. Around her, the alien cadets charged forward, relying on their strength and advanced weapons. They tore through enemies with ease, their weapons lighting up the dark sky. The days after the combat simulation were tense. Jane had proven herself capable, but the reactions from the other cadets were mixed. Some were impressed, while others struggled to accept that a human had outperformed them. The aliens, known for their physical strength and natural combat abilities, couldn't believe that Jane had succeeded by using tactics and intelligence alone. It didn't make sense to them. Krell, who had once mocked Jane, found himself in a difficult position. He had been certain that he would outperform her in every test, but now, after seeing her brilliance in the simulation, his confidence had started to waver. He tried to push the doubt aside, telling himself that Jane had simply gotten lucky. But deep down, he knew better. The next morning, the cadets gathered in the Academy's main hall for the debriefing session. The instructors, a group of experienced and powerful beings from various species, stood at the front of the room, preparing to discuss the results of the combat simulation. When the instructors called out Jane's name, the room fell silent. The instructors rarely acknowledged any cadet individually, but Jane's score had been exceptional. Her performance in the simulation had surpassed all expectations. Cadet Jane, one of the instructors, a tall and fierce-looking alien with 6 eyes, began, "You have exceeded all expectations. Your ability to adapt and think on your feet was remarkable. Not once did you rely on brute force. Instead, you relied on your intelligence and quick thinking. This is what makes a true warrior." The room was still quiet. The cadets exchanged uncertain glances. The instructor's words had left everyone in awe. Krell, standing near the back, clenched his fists. He had to admit it now. Jane was not just lucky. She was good. Jane stood in front of the class, her face calm and composed. She had never been one to seek attention or praise, but she couldn't hide the small flicker of pride that rose inside her. She had worked hard for this moment, and it felt good to finally be recognized for her effort. The instructor turned to address the rest of the cadets. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Strength alone is not the measure of a warrior. Intelligence, strategy, and the ability to adapt are equally important. Let Jane's performance be an example of what can be achieved when we rely on more than just our physical abilities." Krell could feel the eyes of his peers on him. For the first time, he felt uncertain. He had always believed that physical strength was the key to success, but now he realized that there was more to being a warrior than what he had thought. After the meeting, Krell approached Jane. He didn't mock her or belittle her, like he had before. Instead, there was a new respect in his eyes. "You were amazing in that simulation," he said, his voice sincere. "I didn't think you had it in you. I've been training for years, and you showed me that there's more to this than just strength." Jane looked at him, surprised by his words. "Thanks, Krell. I didn't give up. That's all." Krell nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "You've got something special, Jane. Maybe we could train together sometime. I think there's a lot I could learn from you." As Jane watched him walk away, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just the score. It was the respect she had earned. The journey was far from over, but Jane knew that she had taken her first big step. The cadets who had laughed at her now had a new respect for her, and that was worth more than any score. The days after Jane's success in the simulation were unlike any she had experienced before. No longer was she the quiet, out-of-place cadet who was laughed at. Now, her name was known among her peers, and even the instructors began to watch her closely. But with the increased attention came greater expectations. The Academy's next set of training exercises would be even tougher, and Jane had to prove that her previous success wasn't a fluke. The next morning, the cadets were informed of the upcoming tests. It wasn't just about combat anymore. The new set of challenges would test their endurance, speed, teamwork, and decision-making under pressure. The aliens, naturally strong and skilled, would have an advantage. But Jane was determined to prove that her mind and determination could carry her through. The first challenge was a physical endurance test, a grueling race through a dangerous obstacle course. The course was filled with traps, wild creatures, and harsh terrain. The cadets had to navigate through it as quickly as possible, using everything they had learned in their previous training. As the race began, Jane watched her fellow cadets charge ahead with powerful strides, their muscles working like machines. They had the strength to clear obstacles with ease, while Jane had to rely on her agility and quick thinking. She wasn't fast like the aliens, but she was smart. The first part of the course was filled with thick, tangled vines that could easily trip anyone who didn't pay attention. The aliens plowed through them, not caring about the risk of getting caught. Jane, however, slowed down, carefully stepping between the vines. She used her sharp eyes to spot the safe path through the thick mess of plants. Next came a stretch of rocky terrain, steep and unstable. Most of the cadets jumped down, relying on their strength to cushion their fall. Jane, however, took a different approach. She found a narrow ledge along the rocks, one that the other cadets had overlooked. She climbed along the edge, moving carefully but steadily, saving energy for the rest of the course. As she moved through the course, Jane found herself gradually gaining ground. Some of the alien cadets had already exhausted themselves, their powerful bodies worn out from the rough terrain. Jane, on the other hand, was still going strong. She had paced herself, never overexerting her energy. By the time Jane reached the final stretch of the course, only a few cadets were ahead of her. Krell, who had been one of the top cadets in previous tests, was still in the lead, but Jane wasn't far behind. As they approached the last obstacle, a steep wall that seemed impossible to climb, Krell and the others tried to jump and pull themselves up with brute force. But Jane took a moment to think. She spotted a nearby rope, tied to a tree, and used it to pull herself up steadily. When Jane reached the top of the wall, she saw Krell still struggling below, trying to climb without the rope. She had caught up to him. Panting but determined, Jane reached the finish line just moments before Krell. The other cadets, who had been watching, stared in surprise. They had all assumed that the strong alien bodies would win the race, but it was Jane's cleverness and steady pace that had led her to victory. As Jane caught her breath, she couldn't help but smile. She hadn't won by outmuscling anyone. She had won by outthinking them. And that, she realized, was her true strength. As the days went on, Jane found herself slowly becoming a respected cadet at the academy. Her peers no longer laughed at her. They were starting to take her seriously, especially after her success in the endurance race. But there was one cadet who seemed to be watching her more closely than the others: Krell. Krell had been one of the top cadets from the start. Tall, strong, and skilled, he was respected by everyone at the academy. He was known for his fierce combat abilities and was often the first to finish any physical test. But Jane's recent victories had shaken him. She had proven that there was more to being a warrior than just strength, and that made Krell feel uneasy. It wasn't that he hated Jane. On the contrary, he found himself impressed by her intelligence and strategy. He admired how she used her brain to make up for what she lacked in physical strength. But the more he watched her, the more he realized that she was becoming a threat. Not in a bad way, but in a way that challenged everything he believed about training and combat. One evening, after a particularly difficult training session, Krell found himself standing next to Jane as they both caught their breath. The two had just finished a grueling weapons drill, where cadets had to fight each other using both hand-to-hand combat and energy weapons. "You did well today," Krell said, his voice surprisingly friendly. "Better than I expected." Jane raised an eyebrow, unsure of how to respond. Krell had always been a little distant, but now he was speaking to her like an equal. "You're not so bad yourself," she replied, smiling slightly. "But you were pretty fast with that energy sword. I could barely keep up." Krell chuckled. "I've been training with it for years. But I have to admit, you're different. You don't fight like the others." Jane tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "You don't rely on strength," Krell explained. "You think things through. You plan your moves before you make them. I've never seen anyone do that before, not like you." For a moment, there was silence between them. Jane wasn't sure how to take his words. She had always been used to being underestimated, And now Krell was giving her the kind of respect that felt new. "You're right," Jane said finally. "I don't have the same power as you, or the others. But that doesn't mean I can't be just as useful. I can't fight the way you do, but I can outsmart you." Krell looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think I'd like to see that." A spark of challenge lit in Jane's eyes. "You're welcome to try." The next day, during a training exercise, Krell and Jane were paired together in a sparring match. The cadets were eager to see how the two of them would fare against each other. Krell, the powerhouse, and Jane, the strategist. As the match began, it quickly became clear that Krell's strength and speed were far superior to Jane's. He attacked with powerful swings, his energy sword moving faster than Jane could dodge. But Jane was patient. She didn't try to match him blow for blow. Instead, she used her quick thinking to avoid his attacks, constantly staying one step ahead. The crowd watched in silence, waiting for Krell to land a hit. But to their surprise, Jane didn't give him an opening. She moved with agility, using the environment to her advantage. Finally, she managed to outmaneuver Krell, grabbing his sword arm and using his own momentum against him to bring him to the ground. Krell lay there, surprised but impressed. "You got me," he said, laughing. "I didn't think you had it in you." Jane helped him to his feet. "I told you. It's all about thinking ahead." Krell nodded, a smile forming on his face. "You're a worthy rival, Jane. I didn't think I'd ever say this, but I think I could learn something from you." Jane smiled back. "I'm looking forward to it." The time for the final test at the academy had arrived. After weeks of intense training, the cadets were about to face the ultimate challenge, an advanced combat mission in a simulated war zone. This test was more than just a physical challenge. It was a test of strategy, teamwork, and mental endurance. The cadets would be dropped into a hostile environment and tasked with completing a series of high-risk objectives. Only the strongest and most skilled would succeed. The entire academy was buzzing with excitement and nerves. Jane could feel the weight of the test on her shoulders. She had done well in all the previous exercises, but this mission would be unlike anything she had faced before. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about leading a team to victory. And Jane knew that, despite her strengths, she would be expected to perform under pressure. The mission briefing was held in a large, dark room filled with tactical maps and data screens. The instructors, as usual, stood at the front, their stern faces showing no signs of emotion. As the cadets gathered around, the lead instructor spoke. "Today, you will face an enemy force far more advanced than anything you've encountered before. Your objective is simple: infiltrate their stronghold, to disable their weapon systems, and extract valuable intelligence. You will be split into teams, and each team will have its own set of challenges. The success of this mission depends on your ability to think and act as one unit. Fail, and the consequences will be dire." Jane felt the gravity of the situation. She was assigned to a team with Krell and a few other cadets she hadn't worked with much before. She knew Krell's skills well, but the others were a mystery. They had never trained together, and she wasn't sure how they would work under pressure. Once the mission began, the cadets were transported to a simulated alien city. It was a dark, war-torn environment filled with enemy soldiers and complex obstacles. Jane's heart raced as she assessed the surroundings. She knew that every decision they made would determine the outcome. Krell took charge as they approached the enemy base, but Jane quickly realized that his usual tactics wouldn't work here. The terrain was too dangerous, and the enemy was more organized than expected. Instead of charging in, Jane suggested a different approach. "We need to move quietly and avoid detection," she said, looking at Krell and the others. "If we can take out their communication systems first, we can isolate them from reinforcements." Krell hesitated for a moment. He was used to fighting head-on, but he trusted Jane's judgment. "All right, Jane, you lead." The team followed Jane's lead, moving through the streets with stealth and precision. Jane used her knowledge of the environment to guide them, always staying a few steps ahead of the enemy. She was calculating, quick-thinking, and strategic. Krell followed her orders without question, impressed by how well she knew the battlefield. As they approached the communication tower, they were ambushed by enemy forces. The situation quickly escalated into chaos. Gunfire echoed through the city, and the cadets had to fight their way out. Jane and Krell worked together seamlessly, using their skills in combination to neutralize the enemies. But then, disaster struck. One of the cadets in their team was wounded during the fight. The mission was at a critical point, and Jane knew that they had to act fast. She called for a retreat, but the enemy was closing in. The team was trapped. With no time to lose, Jane made a bold decision. She ordered Krell to create a distraction while she carried the injured cadet to safety. It was a risky move, but Jane knew it was the only way to save the mission. Krell agreed without hesitation, and the plan went into action. In the end, Jane managed to complete the objective. The communication tower was disabled, and the team had secured the necessary intelligence. They had won, but at a cost. The cadet who was wounded would need medical attention, and Jane knew that the mission's success was only possible because of teamwork and sacrifice. As they made their way back to the extraction point, Jane looked at her team with a sense of pride. Despite the chaos, they had succeeded. It wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about thinking ahead, making hard choices, and working together. The final test had been a success, but it hadn't been easy. Jane and her team had narrowly escaped danger, and the cost of victory weighed heavily on her mind. The injured cadet, though alive, had been taken for immediate medical treatment, and the others were exhausted. But Jane felt a sense of accomplishment. They had completed the mission, and her leadership had been key to their success. Back at the academy, the cadets were given a brief moment to rest. The instructors gathered all the teams for a debriefing, and Jane, still feeling the adrenaline from the mission, stood among the other cadets. The usual energy in the room was replaced with a quiet tension as everyone waited for the instructor's assessment. The lead instructor stepped forward, his expression unreadable as usual. He looked over the group, his sharp eyes scanning every cadet before settling on Jane. "Cadet Jane," the instructor said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made the room fall silent. "You've proven yourself to be not just capable, but exceptional. Your decisions during the mission were exactly what was needed to secure victory. You have shown that a true warrior is not defined by strength alone." Jane's heart raced, but she held her ground. She had heard the whispers of respect among her peers, but hearing it directly from the instructor felt different. The respect she had earned was no longer just because of her performance in a few simulations. It was because she had led her team through a real challenge and come out on top. The instructor turned to the rest of the cadets. "It is rare that we see a cadet who can lead with such strategy and precision." Cadet Jane's actions today were a clear example of why intelligence and adaptability are just as important as brute force. Let her example serve as a reminder to all of you. There is more to being a soldier than strength. The cadets exchanged glances. Jane could see that many of them were finally beginning to understand her value. Krell, standing a few feet away, met her eyes and gave a subtle nod of approval. Jane wasn't the strongest, and she wasn't the fastest, but she had something else that had earned her a place among the best, her ability to think and adapt. After the debriefing, Jane felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since joining the academy, she wasn't seen as the outsider, the human who didn't belong. She had proven that she was more than just a human cadet. She was a warrior, one who had earned the respect of aliens who once laughed at her. But Jane knew that this wasn't the end. The academy's tests were designed to push cadets to their limits, and she was just getting started. There would be more challenges, more battles to face, and while she had gained respect, Jane was far from satisfied. She had proven that humans could be just as capable as any alien, but she wasn't going to stop there. The journey ahead would be even harder. There would be more obstacles and more chances to prove herself. Jane wasn't finished yet. She had a lot more to show the galaxy. The weeks after the final test were a turning point for Jane. The respect she had earned from the other cadets wasn't just a passing recognition. It was something deeper, something that changed the way everyone saw her. No longer was she the human outsider who didn't belong. Now she was one of them, respected for her skills, her mind, and her leadership. But Jane knew that this new status wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. The Academy had many more tests and challenges ahead, and she had to keep proving herself. The pressure wasn't gone. If anything, it was more intense now. She had earned the respect of her peers, but she also had to live up to it. One day, after a particularly challenging training session, Jane found herself sitting alone in the Academy's courtyard, taking a much-needed break. She was watching the other cadets as they laughed and joked with one another. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. But there was something more to it now. She wasn't just part of the group. She had earned her place, and she knew she had the potential to go even further. As she sat, lost in thought, Krell approached her. He was one of the cadets who had respected her from the beginning, but now there was a different kind of respect between them. He had started to see her not just as a fellow cadet, but as an equal, a worthy rival, and in some ways, a friend. "You've been quiet today," Krell said, sitting down beside her. "What's on your mind?" Jane looked up at him and smiled. "Just thinking. I've been doing a lot of that lately. About the next challenge." Jane nodded. "I'm ready. But I know it won't be easy. The Academy will keep pushing us harder, and I have to keep improving. I'm not there yet." Krell gave her a knowing look. No one's ever truly there yet. The moment you think you've made it is the moment you start falling behind. But you've already proven what you're capable of, Jane. You've shown everyone here that being strong isn't just about muscles or speed. It's about your mind, your adaptability, and your heart. Jane looked at him, surprised by his words. Krell, who had once been one of her toughest rivals, was now speaking to her with a level of respect she had never expected. "I couldn't have done it without the team," she replied. "I led them, but they followed me. We worked together, and that's what made us strong." Krell smiled. "And that's why I respect you. You don't just think about yourself. You think about the team. That's what makes a true leader." Jane felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the praise. It was the recognition that Krell, someone who had once doubted her, now saw her as a leader. She had truly earned his respect. "Thanks, Krell," Jane said, her voice soft. "It means a lot." As the days passed, Jane's confidence continued to grow. She knew the road ahead would be filled with more challenges, but now she was ready. She wasn't the underdog anymore. She was a warrior in her own right. And no matter what came next, she was determined to face it head-on, using her intelligence, her strength, and her heart to guide her. The Academy had shaped her, but it was clear that Jane was no longer just a cadet. She was someone to watch, someone who had the potential to change the future. As the weeks passed, Jane's confidence and skill continued to grow. She had proven herself time and time again, and the respect from her fellow cadets was something she had earned, not just because of her abilities, but because of her determination to never give up. But even with all her progress, one thing remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something she hadn't fully conquered. The Academy was preparing for a new set of challenges, and Jane knew this would be different. The instructors had hinted at something bigger, something more dangerous. Jane couldn't help but wonder what it would be. She had already faced plenty of tough tests, but the weight of the unknown made her heart race. One evening, just before the next challenge was set to begin, Jane found herself once again in the Academy courtyard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the training grounds. As she sat on a bench, her mind wandered. She thought about everything that had happened, how she had come from being the laughed-at human to someone who now stood beside the strongest cadets, earning their respect. It hadn't been easy, and there were moments when she almost wanted to give up, but she had never backed down. Just as she was lost in thought, Krell appeared beside her. He had become more than just a rival over time. The two had formed an unexpected bond, one based on mutual respect, hard work, and understanding. Though they still had their differences, Krell had proven to be someone Jane could rely on. They had worked together countless times, learning from each other's strengths. "You look deep in thought," Krell said, taking a seat beside her. Jane smiled, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Just thinking about everything that's happened. I've come a long way, but I feel like there's still something more. Something bigger coming." Krell nodded, his gaze serious. "You've already proven yourself, Jane. You're not just here because you're human. You're here because you've got what it takes. Whatever comes next, I know you'll be ready." Jane looked at him, surprised by the depth of his words. Krell had always been the confident one, the one who never seemed to doubt himself. But there was something different now, something in the way he spoke to her, as if he truly believed in her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Jane said quietly. "You've always been there, challenging me, pushing me. But you've also been the one to show me that I'm capable of more than I ever thought." Krell glanced at her, his expression softening. "We've both learned from each other. I've learned that strength isn't just about power. It's about how you think and what you're willing to fight for. You've taught me that." Jane smiled, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. The bond between her and Krell had grown over time, built on respect and friendship. They had come a long way from the rivalry they once shared, and now they were stronger together. "Thanks, Krell," she said, her voice steady. "No matter what happens next, I'm ready." Krell nodded, his expression serious but filled with respect. "We all are. We'll face whatever comes together." As they sat there, side by side, Jane realized something. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She had already shown the Academy and herself what she was capable of. Whatever challenge came next, she was ready to face it head-on, because she knew she wasn't alone. Together, they would conquer whatever the Academy threw their way. The final challenge was upon them. Jane could feel the anticipation building in the air, not just among the cadets, but also from the instructors. The previous tests had pushed them to their limits, but this was something different. This mission would test every skill they had developed, every lesson they had learned, and it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. The cadets were gathered in the main briefing room, where the instructors stood, their eyes scanning the room, ensuring everyone was prepared. Jane stood with her team, including Krell and several other cadets she had come to know over the weeks. They had all trained hard, but this would be the true test of their abilities, individually and as a team. The instructor stepped forward, his voice stern and commanding. "This is your final test. You will face a real-time, live simulation against an elite alien force. Your objective is to infiltrate and disable their weapon systems. The mission will test your combat skills, strategy, and most importantly, your ability to work together as a team." Jane's heart beat faster. It was real. There was no turning back. She looked around at her team. They were all focused, ready for what was to come, but Jane knew it wouldn't be easy. The aliens they would face in the simulation were unlike anything they had encountered before. They were stronger, faster, and more deadly. But Jane had something they didn't. She had her mind, her strategy, and the trust of her team. As the mission began, the team was dropped into an alien city, dark, intimidating, and filled with traps and hidden enemies. Jane quickly assessed their surroundings. This was no longer about showing off her individual skills. It was about using everything she had learned to keep her team safe and guide them to success. Krell took the lead, charging forward with confidence. But Jane, as usual, kept her eyes on the bigger picture. "Wait," she said, raising her hand. "We need to plan this out. If we rush in, we'll be walking right into an ambush." Krell paused, looking back at her. For the first time, there was no argument, no hesitation. He trusted her judgment completely. "We move slowly," Jane continued. We clear each area methodically. We can't afford to make mistakes. The team moved forward, following Jane's lead. They took their time, moving cautiously through the city, neutralizing enemies silently. Jane's tactical mind was working at full speed, constantly thinking ahead. Every corner was a potential threat, every shadow a possible enemy. But Jane had learned how to stay calm under pressure, and her team followed her lead. Finally, they reached the alien weapons systems. It was heavily guarded, and the odds seemed impossible. But Jane had a plan. She and Krell worked together, using their strengths, his physical prowess and her strategy, to outsmart the enemy. They disabled the weapons systems, completing the mission. As they made their way back to the extraction point, Jane felt a sense of pride she had never felt before. They had done it. They had succeeded as a team. It wasn't about individual glory. It was about trusting each other, working together, and using their combined strengths to win. When they returned to the academy, the instructors congratulated them. But Jane knew the real victory wasn't just in completing the mission. It was in the journey. She had proven, once and for all, that humans could stand toe-to-toe with the best of the galaxy, and her legacy at the academy had been sealed. She wasn't just a cadet anymore. She was a warrior, the leader, and she had earned her place among the stars.